Welcome, everybody, again to another episode of the ideaXme show, a show that showcases the profiles of humans behind some really big ideas that are shaping our world for the better. My name is Bernard Siu, and I'm the climate change ambassador for ideaXme. And today we have a very special guest, Mr. Frans Nota, who is the founder of the ClimateLaunchpad initiative, one of the world's largest accelerator program for clean tech business ideas spanning across more than 53 countries. There have been more than 1,400 startups that have been trained this year. Welcome, Mr. Frans.
Thank you. It's a pleasure.
Mr. Frans, perhaps just to kickstart, maybe you can tell us a little bit about yourself. Like, how did you get started in the climate change space?
Yeah, I'm a little older than you. So when I was 18, the big issue in Europe was acidification of forests. We weren't talking about climate change in those days yet. So I decided I was gonna study that. So I went to a university in the Netherlands called Wageningen, where they had the first university that had an environmental technology class study. And from there I've worked in local government at the Environmental Agency of Amsterdam, at the National Ministry of the Environment in the Netherlands. And then I must admit I got a little bored by the environment and by especially by the sort of negative tone of people that work in the environment. Like I saw lots of improvement, for instance, in air quality, and somehow the people that are worried about the environment always are worried, even though there's improvement. So I moved on a bit to innovation. We worked at the Prime Minister's office for 3 years in the Netherlands as the innovation secretary. I set up my own think tank called Knowledge Land. And then about 10 years ago, I moved back into the environment space, but then the big theme was climate change. And I became a part of the founding team of EIT Climate-KIC, which is a European program on climate change. And within that program, I became responsible for all the entrepreneurship activities. So I set up the Climate-KIC Accelerator, which by now has had about 1,500 teams in its program. They got funding, they got coaching, and they now have altogether gotten sort of 1.5 billion in follow-on funding. And I started ClimateLaunchpad, which is how you found me, which is for sort of the early idea stages. So when people are working on sort of considering, should I start a company doing something about climate change, that's for what we had ClimateLaunchpad. And ClimateLaunchpad is now, it's almost 60 countries. It's like 3,000 teams that have gone through the whole thing. It's been incredibly fun. One of the big surprises has been that there are literally entrepreneurs everywhere that would like to work on climate change. So a lot of my work is basically helping people with that dream of trying to start a company that does something good in the world, and then specifically climate change.
Yeah, I mean that's very interesting and really amazing work. I guess, just to sort of expand a little bit on that, on ClimateLaunchpad, like perhaps you can share with us, like, what are some of your proudest moments in the journey that you have had with ClimateLaunchpad?
Yeah, if you set up something like ClimateLaunchpad and also the Climate-KIC Accelerator, you're the coach, right? You're not the entrepreneur. But when the coach is happy when the team does really well, or when players of the team do really well. Some of my happiest moments were actually this summer. I got an email from someone I trained in 2015 in Iceland. His name is John. And John was already retired when he got into the program. So many people think, when they think about entrepreneurship, it's like people in their 20s and everything is hip and flashy. But this was someone who worked his whole professional career in the aluminum smelter industry. And it's a pretty big industry in Iceland. And when he retired, he was like, I think I can improve the carbon footprint of this industry. So something you need to know, the way we make aluminum now is basically it's a battery process. So you have aluminum oxide, and you put a current through it to get the oxygen from the aluminum. The question is, where does the oxygen go? And the process worked with graphite. So basically you burn the graphite, which produces enormous amounts of CO2, of course. And that's how we get pure aluminum. Of course, the electricity in Iceland is mostly green because it's geothermal. So that is okay. But the problem left is to have a better process for getting the oxygen of the aluminum. So John worked on that. He clearly knew the industry. He had a very hard time in the training because he was challenging me constantly. But he won second prize that year when we had the finals. So that was already pretty cool. And now I got an email from him with a picture and a press release where he made his first sort of block of aluminum, and it's probably about the size of a phone, something like that. It was like not that big. But what was cool about the picture is he was offering this first zero carbon aluminum block to the president of Iceland. So it shows his team with the president, and so we sort of had a full-on conversation how he had been doing the past 5 years, and yeah, it's just so great. It's the same when you're like a teacher and you see your students later in life do really well. So those are always my proudest moments, when I've helped people in the early stages and sometimes in the later stages, be successful. So John is an example of that. Another company that was part of the Climate-KIC Accelerator was two flying drone companies from Germany. One is Lilium and the other is Volocopter. And both are doing incredibly well. They have like both over 100 million in funding in euros. And I bought a ticket to be on one of the first flights of the Volocopter when it starts its service, for me and my wife. That was a pretty good moment this year. And also very cool this year, I got, it's actually on my desk here. I got this product. I don't know if you know Tado. It's like Nest. It's like a smart thermostat. This one is quite strong in Europe. This one controls your AC, but they also have one for your heating. And I literally have that in my house now. So I remember them vividly in 2012. They came into the German part of the program. And now 8 years later, they're multi-million company, and I can actually buy their stuff, and it's in my house. And it also, most importantly, it does what it promised. So it promised, stuff will get greener, you will save on energy, and I'm literally saving on energy. So yeah, all those things are really good and very happy moments.
Yeah, and no, that's really interesting. Thanks for sharing that. And what would you say are the important qualities to be, a successful climate pruner, if I may say so?
A pruner? What does
a climate
mean?
Entrepreneur.
Oh,
someone
entrepreneur.
Entrepreneur is working, and yeah.
Yeah, not different from other entrepreneurs. So my favorite definition of an entrepreneur is entrepreneurship is the pursuit of opportunity without regard to resources currently controlled. So it's the pursuit of opportunity without regard to the resources you really have right now. This is not my definition. It's from a Harvard professor, Stevenson, who came up with it in the 80s. And he was basically doing research into entrepreneurs, which in the 80s were considered crazy people. It's like a mental basically what we changed the signs on the building. So it used to be mental institutions, and now we call them incubators. That was sort of in the 80s, you were kind of nuts if you started a company, because life inside these large companies was really good. And so in his research, his hypothesis was that the people that started companies were the people who were sort of had a very high need for excitement and risk. These would be people that would prefer to do bungee jumping without a rope, sort of. And what he found in his research was actually the opposite. So it turned out that the entrepreneurs were really good at managing risk. They were sort of much more risk managers than risk seekers. So what you need as an entrepreneur is basically, you do need lots of energy because it's hard. And it's not hard in the way that an education is hard, where you go really deep, because you need to be skillful in many things. Like you need expertise on a certain subject, but you also need very good empathy. Like you need to be a very good listener. People tend to talk about entrepreneurs being pitchers. I don't believe that so much. I've more seen success with really good listeners that really understand their customers. You need to be really skillful in language. Like you need to be convincing to, like if you're selling to a large company, you're not only selling to one person, you're selling to the CEO, but also to the director of sales, and you're selling to the experts in the R&D department. And you need to take them all with you in the sales process in their own language. So, yeah, you know, you need to be willing basically to fail. Maybe that's and be okay with that. And then you need a little luck. Like I've seen wonderful ideas fail. I've seen ideas that I saw first and thought, geez, what a terrible idea, succeed. Like literally the team I mentioned from Volocopter, basically they built a flying drone that transport humans. And I saw their early prototypes and it looked terrible. It looked worse than the Wright brothers plane. And you think, well, how can this be a market? These are crazy Germans. We should not allow them to do this. But yeah, here they are. They got over 100 million in funding, and I just bought a ticket to be one of their early customers. So, yeah, you do need a little luck, but I'd say inspiration in the idea, like believe in the idea that you can do this, and then very good human skills, like good listening, not so much the ego that shows up. Like I'm not a fan of Elon Musk, for instance. I do think Tesla does amazing things, but he sort of, just like Steve Jobs, he becomes this rude personality that many people think this is how an entrepreneur should be. And the ones that I see, yeah, they do have a drive, but actually they're better listeners than talkers in general. The ones that I seem like are the better performance, it seems.
One of the things that you've mentioned earlier about, having, it's about being willing to fail, and, getting back on your feet. Yeah, I guess I was just interested to know, were there any barriers or challenges in your initial launch of the Climate Launchpad initiative, and how did you personally overcome them?
No, I was already shameless by then, I would say. I'm not from an entrepreneurial family. I never considered myself to be an entrepreneur, but when I was in my early 20s, I was a summer for work in the US, and I ran out of money. And this was the 80s, so you didn't have internet. Phone calls were like $3-5 a minute to Europe. My parents weren't home, so I couldn't call them to wire money. So I was in New York without money. And I remember vividly walking over 9th Avenue, and I just walked into every restaurant that I could find to see if they would hire me. And number 20 hired me. And that's how I sort of survived the holiday. And from then on, I've become really good in just asking people, well, can I work with you? I mentioned I worked at the Prime Minister's office. It was, I consider that job a failure. It was quite painful. I got the lead in a very sort of a high-profile government program that basically was not successful. If you look at it, a few things happened, but it wasn't close to what I wanted to achieve. And there were very nasty articles written about me in the media. And that's all very helpful, because what you learn is that you don't die when something goes wrong. Like if you would have asked me as a 20-year-old, well, would you survive 3 weeks in a row a nasty column about you that 350,000 people read each weekend? I probably would have said, well, pooh, it's going to be hard. As it turns out, you're fine. So by the time I started ClimateLaunchpad, I already had enough scratches and sort of scar tissue to not be bothered by failure. And the funny thing about ClimateLaunchpad, it was never meant to be this big. So ClimateLaunchpad was a complete accident. We stumbled into what was clearly an interest, but it was actually meant to be a little marketing thingy that we were going to do one year. So it started as a marketing for a program that we ran, the Climate-KIC Accelerator, to get ideas from other countries than the 6 countries where we were operating. And then, so we came up with it in April. Like, wouldn't it be nice if we would have more teams from, let's say, Spain, Italy, and a few other teams where we didn't have operations? Yeah, it's a good idea. Okay. Facebook campaign. Well, one afternoon brainstorming, and someone said, why don't we do a competition? Then we can use the juries also as the selection, so we don't have to do an extra selection. It's sufficient. Ah, sounds good. And then we got a person who managed it, Sarah, who completely dove into it. Like, basically, I didn't really have time for it because I had that big program. Mm-hmm. And she made it a wonderful thing. And we were like in October, we were done. So we came up with it in April. In October, we were finished. And everybody's like, wow, that was fun. We should do this more often. And so then we sort of arranged some money to do it again the year after. And then suddenly we got all these emails from people in countries saying, well, can we join? Mm. And we're like, oh, yeah, sure. And then we got like, so the second year was 20 countries. The third year was 30 countries. And then but in the beginning, we were like, yeah, but this is not supposed to be big. And by the time we got to 30 countries, we were like, oh, well, we could also just decide that the goal is to make it big, and that's how we got to 60. But the reason it was successful was not because of some beautiful vision or like a strong drive. We just stumbled into what turned out to be an interest from people all over the planet to sort of be involved with entrepreneurship, and also to sort of, as a country, like, for instance, it also runs in Malaysia. The people in Malaysia that are working on climate change are always, fighting the good fight in an environment that's not always supportive. So to be part of something globally that is working on it, it helps you validate that you're working on something meaningful. So it became sort of a community of people that want to work on this. You could call it a sort of global entrepreneurs community of people who want to solve climate change. And yeah, we never planned for it to be big.
Or even a movement that seems to, be picking up all across the world, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think one of the key features in ClimateLaunchpad as well is this great mentorship program that you have, like where you bring in experts to, sort of provide feedback and ideas to, interested, startup participants. I was just curious to know if in your life, like, is there someone that you look up to as a mentor? And if you could perhaps share a little bit about that.
Yeah, sure. I was really lucky. So I had the first two people I worked for. One was the deputy mayor of Amsterdam. I was in my early 20s, and I sort of stepped into a 3-month gig to help him, and quit my studies for a while. And then the 3 months turned into a year. And then after that, I was recruited basically by the director of the environmental department of the city of Amsterdam. So it took a while before I got back into my studies. And they were both very unaverage people, I would say. They were a little crazy. So the deputy mayor, well, he couldn't be a politician now, basically, because he almost stuttered. Like, he was really not good in media, but he had such a wonderful brain. Like, he in any discussion, he would always successfully lift the level of the discussion and sort of get everybody engaged in conversation, and sort of thinking, well, okay, it's nice that we're working on this problem, but could we make it even better? And at the same time, he was just like, he smoked so much, and in those days you could still smoke inside offices. So we were always sitting in this blue smoke. Yeah, such a unique personality. But such a bright mind. So it was so inspiring to work with him, and sort of see what happens in a group of civil servants, because basically we would always meet with civil servants from different types of staff. He was doing urban planning and traffic, public transportation, that type of work. And in every meeting, he would basically challenge everybody to come up with better solutions. So there was work done, there were proposals, and he was like, yeah, okay, I'm okay with what you suggest, but could we bring it even further? So that was amazing to work with him. And so my second boss was the director of the environmental department. And he was just fearless. So if you've worked in government, you know, people tend to look at government as like a homogeneous bureaucracy, but that's not what it is. People are actually fighting nonstop inside governments. There is the environmental department fighting with the traffic people. There's the economic people fighting with the environmental people. Like what you see between political parties, you partly see also inside government. And he trained me basically to be fearless. So I once ended up in a fight with people of the traffic department, and it was highly political because it was going to be a referendum, and I was very young. I was probably 23, and I was working with people twice my age. They were all in their mid-40s, so I was always intimidated by how old they are and how young I was. But in this meeting, I just stuck to my ground, and I said, no, we're not going to do it the way you propose it. We, as environmental department, need to keep our autonomy when it's about the environmental data, blah, blah, blah. Something complicated, doesn't even matter that much. And the director of transportation and traffic was furious, and he basically kicked me out of the meeting. And then the next day, it was before mobile phone, so I couldn't send a WhatsApp message to my director saying, look, I got in a fight with this guy. You have a meeting with him tomorrow, be prepared. He knew nothing. So next morning, my director goes meet the director of traffic. And I wasn't there, of course, but something must have happened that where the director of traffic was furious at me. And I was like, God, this might cost me my job, you know, because this was a really big shot at City Hall. So this environmental director comes back to the office in the afternoon, and he says, come with me to his office. And I'm like, oh God, oh God. And he closes, he says after me, close the door. And I go, oh, it's even worse. And then he started smiling. He said, oh God, you did so well. I've never seen this traffic guy so angry. But I said, what did you say? He said, well, you know, if he has a problem with you, he has to come to me because you're working on my behalf. And, you know, if he has a problem with you, then he should talk to me and shouldn't fight with you. And that sort of gave me the trust that this person will always have my back, always have your back. And of course, all my colleagues from then on knew too that this director will always have your back. And the loyalty that gives and the energy that gives to a group of young policymakers was amazing. So those two, I'll never forget.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that. And I guess sort of just to drive home the point a little bit. Well, I mean, we all know that, you know, the climate crisis, as some would say, is the defining issue of our generation. Scientists have warned that we only have a dozen of years left to keep temperatures from increasing by 1.5 degrees. Do you personally feel that we are making progress in this space? And if not, you know, what's on your wish list and what would you like to see happen?
We're making amazing progress. Like, it's stunning, honestly, if you look at it. So I already told you that I study environmental technology. So the first paper that we had to write, we had to pick what was called alternative energy source in those days and see if it could scale. So I was part of a group that picked wind energy. And we did an analysis of the potential of wind energy to sort of become a major contributor to the electricity grid. And this was 1985, 1986. And we did our homework, you know, and it was very clear. There was no way that wind energy ever was going to be cost competitive with coal, with gas, whatever. And look where we are now. It's just like, how long is this ago? 35 years? Wind is the cheapest form of energy in probably more than half of the world. So that's amazing progress. The same story is true for wind. When I was working at the environmental department of Amsterdam, we ran a pilot with an electric car. It was a Volkswagen Passat, and it had been tweaked by a Swiss engineering company called ABB. And they put in a battery, made it electric, and it was a fantastic car. Like, honestly, was surprisingly good. And we hired a student to drive around all the important decision makers of the city of Amsterdam and all the business people to show them, like, this could be the future. But when the project was almost finished, I had a meeting with the people from ABB, and they explained to me how expensive that car was. And just the battery that was in that car was 250,000 euros. So, like, you know, this is 92, 93. it's clearly impossible to ever get a technology like that into the hands of the consumers, because nobody can afford a car like that. It's impossible. And here we are. It's 2020, and in Europe, probably electric cars are cost competitive now compared to ICE, as certainly over lifetime cost. But even if you buy them now normally in a store, like, it's going down very rapidly. And 5 years from now, there's no question you're a stupid person if you buy a car with an explosion, an engine that does explosions in it. So the progress has been stunning, in all honesty. If you've asked me 30 years ago, like, do you see a future where solar is cheaper than coal? No way, of course, no way. So the transformation that we're in is going incredibly well. Is it going fast enough? Well, of course not. But that's like the Formula One driver complaining that the car should always be faster. I'm actually pretty impressed by the speed that we have. Also, I think from both from sun, wind, electric cars, batteries, have shown our political leaders that there is a huge economic opportunity here. Like, where the environment used to be something that was expensive, it is now actually profitable, and it helps your economy. So the tone of the discussion and the sort of the wording is completely changed. We're now talking clearly about the biggest economic opportunity of the 21st century. There's only idiots think that is not true. Like who would not want to be where Denmark is, a country of 5 million people, 6 million people, and they're still the leading producer of wind turbines in the world. Like, that seems a pretty good deal to me. So the opportunity is clearly there. The only thing where it's lacking, I see a disconnect between sort of the IPCC reports and sort of where the policy is going when it's about innovation. So if you look at the IPCC reports, they basically say, well, electricity mostly covered. If you think about it, that's actually not what the IPCC report says. That's what I say, and basically insiders that know the green energy industry well. Though, and it should go faster, but 30 years from now, there's not going to be that much coal around, and gas and all that stuff. We've got alternatives for that are better, that are cheaper. What we don't have yet is a good strategy for all the other stuff we do with oil, and what we do, for instance, in industrial processes where we need very high peak temperatures. So that's where, for instance, hydrogen comes in, or where sort of special application of electricity come in. And what is easy when you're at the IPCC is that you say, well, it needs to go down this much, and we think with this technology. Like, so in all the scenarios of the IPCC, there's a drop in CO2 levels because we are taking carbon out of the atmosphere and doing something with it. Either we put it in reservoirs, or we make new products out of them. Now, if you want that 10 years from now at any scale, what I would need right now is thousands of startups working on it, right? So we all understand that by the time Google becomes a household name, it's already 10 years down the road. Google started in 97, and by 2007, they were like a big company. So if I need to capture a lot of CO2 to make, for instance, synthetic kerosene, or to make plastics, or whatever you want to make with the CO2 that we catch, or you want to drop it in some, though I find it super unattractive to simply put it and store it somewhere. I don't see the use of that at all. But worst case scenario, we store it. Well, in order to have that technology available in companies that can operate a good business, you need to have companies working on it now. And what I've seen in all the programs that I've managed, so Climate-KIC Accelerator, ClimateLaunchpad, I've seen hundreds of these companies, and they all have the same pattern. They all turn into zombies. They don't die, they don't live. So they run on government subsidies, and they don't attract customers because their product is simply too expensive. So there's no market for their product. And because there's no real market for their product, they don't get investors behind them in the tens of millions of euros that you need to scale a company. Because why would you as an investor? Because there's no deal here. There's no business to be made. And then you can say, well, those investors, they should think more about the planet. Well, maybe they should, but it's your pension money. It's my pension money. We put that money in the hands of the investors because we want our pensions guaranteed, so it's not really a fair request towards the investors. Like, lose our money, basically, that would be the message to the investors. Like, go green, but don't make money. Well, there's a consequence. Pensions are in trouble. So this is the puzzle that needs to be solved, I think. So for the challenges that come after greening electricity and greening mobility, which we're on our road of doing, and doing quite successfully, I'd say. And yes, it could be faster, and I want that, but basic problem solved. If you want the other problems to be solved, you need to do the same thing that happened with wind and solar and electric cars, which is somebody has to make it a market. And there's a few ways you can do this. So one way to create a market is to say, as national government of Denmark, well, if you build a wind turbine, we're going to sponsor the part of the electricity that's too expensive. So basically, we cover the cost difference between what immature technology now costs compared to the normal grid price. And that's how you create a market, right? It becomes clear for investors. The Germans did it too. It was an Einspeisegesetz in Germany. So they did it not only for wind, they also did it for solar. And you would be guaranteed for 20 years a payback based on the production of electricity, either through your wind turbines or your solar cells. So feed-in tariffs really work. And they've created artificial markets. You pay a high price at the start. And because the industry becomes bigger, it learns, prices go down, and then the subsidies can go down. And that's where we are now. And so basically, Denmark paid for the R&D that was needed to get wind turbines to scale. Germany did that same thing for solar, together with China. So China at one point decided, we want to be the powerhouse that produces these solar cells and solar panels. So China also subsidized some of that cost reduction. For electric cars, it was California, Norway, the Netherlands that subsidized in all kinds of ways the introduction of electric cars. Like in the Netherlands, I believe we have the highest density of charging stations. And charging stations cost money. You barely make money out of them. So that's a key thing that you need if you want to go to electric cars. There's, of course, subsidies for buying these cars in many countries. All these are instruments to make sure that when a technology is not yet cheap enough, but you can see it getting cheaper over time, that you can do. So you create an artificial market. I don't really see that market right now for CO2. For instance, to make plastics with CO2, which is chemically not that complicated. It's what we do. It's what nature does. So the instruments needed that sort of bridge this abstract graphs from the IPCC that say, well, we need to, start taking carbon out of the atmosphere. And the sort of the long-term goals of all these governments that say the same. Well, we're going to need thousands of people actually trying to come up with solutions for that. And they have to do it inside companies. So I would love for governments to create markets so entrepreneurs can go into these spaces and actually get funded. And then 10 years from now are really big companies. So that's the challenge I see. But, and by the way, whoever solves this problem first as a country is going to be an energy and economy powerhouse of the 21st century. You're going to be the new Saudi Arabia or the new Russia in terms of what that means for the world economy. Like the biggest oil producers will go out of business, and the ones that figure out how to create all these chemicals that we're still going to need, but do it with CO2, do it efficiently, build the infrastructure for it, make it scalable, have the investment behind it, the project financing. If you can bring all that together in the next 10 years, you're ready to completely go off the charts economically when the world catches up and we're going to start pricing carbon.
That's very, very interesting insights, and certainly something that that's food for thought. I guess one final question that I have is that, Frans, you're seen as an inspirational leader in this field. If there was one key takeaway for our listeners today, what would that be?
Well, you can do one of the best things in life, I think, is to work on something that you're passionate about, that is valuable for the world, for the people around you, for your kids, for you. And climate change is just that. So I'm 53 now. And the last thing that I can imagine is me going on in retirement. That to me is like a horror scenario, that I'm forced to play golf with Donald Trump. I find it the most boring thing. So my goal is to never retire, and to just, because I love work so much, because I like this work so much. So, if I'm lucky, I have another 30 years in me, in good health. Who knows, maybe even more, we'll see. But for the next 30 years, I can earn a living and work on something that I find truly meaningful. And then the other thing that has been one of the gifts of doing this work, I run into the nicest people all the time. So the people that I've met, all these entrepreneurs that work on climate change, they're the most wonderful people that I have met. So not only, it gives me income, it gives me a sense of doing something useful, and I meet all these wonderful people all across the world. And I'd say this is open to everyone. So I don't know how old you are, you're a bit younger than me. The next 50 years of your life, this can be your life's work. And it's wonderful. And one of the most interesting things, so when I started my studies, of course, it felt like I was the underdog. And I'm getting more and more feeling like, I was right all along. And it's only going to get better. So come join the movement. We need all the good brains, all the good energy, all the willingness to sort of work for people to solve this problem, for humanity and for ourselves. And it's going to be a wonderful journey.
Thank you very much, Frans, for sharing your wonderful stories and inspiring, insights with the listeners of the IdeaXme show today. Thank you once again.
Very much my pleasure. Thank you for having me, Ryan.